You know, every time I bring Heather McDonald on this show, I say that she is one of the very top reporters in the country. And then sometimes I think, am I being too fulsome in my flattery? And then I go research again and have to go back and read her stuff. And she is one of the best reporters in the country, if not the very best. She just is doing work that no one else is doing. She is absolutely terrific on race, on cops. She has a new book coming out called When Race Trumps Merit, How the Pursuit of Equity Sacrifices Excellence, Destroys Beauty, and Threatens Lives. Officially, it's available for pre-order on Monday, but it's actually, I'm looking at the Amazon page, it's available for pre-order now. Pre-order it because her stuff is absolutely great. Heather, it's great to see you.
I love that plug. Thank you so much, Andrew.
So let's talk about Tyre Nichols. I'm sure you watch these videos. What did you take away from this?
I took away that training in Memphis is absolutely abysmal for police officers, and possibly recruitment standards are as well. This was a deplorable stain on the profession of policing. I don't believe it's representative at all, but I completely understand the public's dismay and the desire to understand whether this is in fact a candid window into mistreatment that's going on every day. I don't think it is. I think the left and President Biden is demagoguing it, but it is a fair question to ask after seeing something as completely antithetical to the standards of police profession as these videos have shown us.
That's what it looked like. It did look absolutely terrifying. We've all been stopped for traffic violations, and it's just a frightening thing to think about. Why were 5 guys from this elite elite division, the Scorpion division, why were they doing a traffic stop, do you think?
Oh, well, traffic stops are quite important in fighting violent crime. The National Traffic Safety Highway Administration has an entire program, and has had one for decades, on what it calls the nexus between crashes and crime. It turns out that neighborhoods with the highest levels of violent crime also have the worst driving. I know a criminologist at the University of Cincinnati who's done research in Over the Rhine, which is Cincinnati's inner city neighborhood. And he says that the driving behavior you see there just makes your hair stand up on end. You know, people running red lights all the time, speeding past school zones, completely indifferent to children on the street. So it's perfectly appropriate to be looking for reckless driving, because also, Andrew, it is what residents of high crime neighborhoods want the police to do. There was a video that came out of North Minneapolis after the George Floyd riots completely destroyed law enforcement there, of a high school principal after there'd just been a shooting of a student, one of her students, a fatal shooting. And what she was complaining about is the fact that people were speeding like crazy through the neighborhood. Now, the Memphis Police Department is trying to discredit the officers' reports that Mr. Nichols was driving down the wrong way of a street. But frankly, that behavior would not be at all out of the norm for a neighborhood in a city with the violent crime problem and the disorder problem that Memphis has.
So let's talk about this. All the cops were black. Nichols is obviously black. And yet we're still told that this is a race problem. And from one perspective, I can sort of see why that might be true. The lovable, always trustworthy Al Sharpton came out and said they wouldn't have done this in the white side of town. But I've been to Memphis, and the black side of town is really bad. It is really frightening in some of those neighborhoods there. And, does that affect the way police look at black people?
You know what? We'll have to be honest. Police every day see a reality that Americans completely turn their eyes away from. Yeah. And that is an extraordinary psychological burden because the rest of the country is going around pretending that there aren't vast behavioral disparities and that the only reason for the overrepresentation of blacks in prison or the underrepresentation of blacks as Google computer engineers must be racism. Whereas in fact, you have an inner city culture that is simply pathological. There is no other way to explain these 15 and 16-year-olds that are almost joyfully spraying sidewalks with bullets, indifferent to the fact that they're taking down toddlers in the process. So, it would be very unrealistic psychologically to say that police officers are not on their guard in high crime neighborhoods. I remember after one of the highly publicized police shootings in New York City of a young man, Sean Bell, who was coming out of a strip joint, and I think he was in his car was a gangbanger, and there was some sort of traffic altercation, and the police did shoot, killing Mr. Bell. A representative of the detectives union told me, we would be willing to stipulate that officers may be a little faster on the trigger when confronting Black suspects if the left were willing to acknowledge that the reason for that is the vastly disproportionate rates of Black crime. I mean, let me just throw one more statistic at you, Andrew, and then get back to our conversation. Blacks between the ages of 10 and 24 die of gun homicide at 25 times the rate of whites between the ages of 10 and 24. They're not being killed by the police. They're not being killed by whites. They're being killed by other Blacks. Blacks commit gun homicide at about 25 times the rate of whites. And police officers, 42% of all cop killers on average are Black males, even though Black males are 6% of the population. A police officer is 400 times as likely to be killed by a Black as an unarmed Black is to be killed by a police officer. So those things matter. By and large, however, our usual test for racist policing, which is simply that arrest and stops are disproportionately Black, is not a valid test of racism. That disproportion is the inevitable result of enforcing the law.
Wow. See, now you came up, I believe, with the phrase "the Ferguson effect," the police drawing back when this, this publicized investigations take place and these charges are slung about. But one of the things I just heard yesterday was that police are now having a terrible time recruiting because nobody wants to be a cop because the cops are given no respect, and in fact, the opposite. So now you said you looked at this video and you saw really poor training. Police departments are forced to lower their standards because they're not getting the number of recruits they need. So you're in this kind of cycle of death, basically, brought on by the continual pounding of this racial theory, which doesn't really hold up. It doesn't actually describe reality. And I know, I mean, just in the last minute, you've given more facts. You've spoken more facts to this audience than they might be getting if they were watching ABC, CBS, or NBC. And yet you are never invited onto those networks. You are, well respected, many awards and all that, but not by those people. So how does this break through? Do you despair? I mean, is there any chance of somehow changing this narrative?
It's quite extraordinary. The chief of police in Washington, D.C., just came out with a statement saying this unbelievably radical so-called criminal reform bill that is unwinding law enforcement even further in the name of fighting disparate impact. What about the criminal? What about the victims? And what's so amazing is that the race activists have thrown their lot in with Black criminals rather than Black victims, because it is the fact that Blacks are way, way over victimized by violent street crime. 10,000 Blacks were killed in 2020. That's 3,000 more than all whites and Hispanics combined, even though Blacks are only 13% of the population. But the left would somehow rather privilege the criminal than the victim. I can't begin to explain it. And, it wasn't turned around in the 2020 midterm elections. I do not think crime played a significant role there, despite the much closer race in New York City for the state governor, because the Republican was focusing on crime, but elsewhere it didn't matter. And at this point, it kind of looks like the people who care the most about Black victims of crime are white conservatives.
Yeah.
And when they finally are told one too many times by the New York Times that to raise the alarm about crime is racist, and they say, okay, fine, fine with us, we'll walk away, then nothing's going to happen. What will turn it around is if white kids start getting shot in drive-by shootings. Right now, it's almost exclusively Black children, toddlers, 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, gunned down in their beds, in their front porches, at birthday parties, jumping on trampolines in their parents' car. It's Black children that are getting gunned down. Al Sharpton has nothing to say about it. Benjamin Crump has nothing to say about it. If this spills over into white communities, then you'll see change.
It's a kind of racism that when they talk about when liberals talk about Black people, they mean Black criminals. It's almost as if they think that is representative of Black life, which it actually is not. I mean, it is representative of a problem in Black life. There's a theory that the federal government, one of the things that happens after these well-publicized shootings is that the federal government sometimes tries to gain oversight over the local police. And usually that means a further hike in crime because the federal government restrains the local law enforcement. Do you think that there's an underlying effort by the federal government to take over local policing?
No, I don't. That's a conspiracy theory.
Okay.
They wouldn't possibly be able to do that. But I just think that Democratic politicians, and Joe Biden has been the most inflammatory both before and after the Tyre Nichols shooting. It's absolutely criminal what he's been saying. He's pulled out his favorite trope about Blacks, being in daily fear of their lives from the police. That's an ideological position for them. It's going to make Blacks more resistant to the police, more likely to resist arrest, more violence directed at officers, and, as you say, more officers backing off from sound, constitutional, colorblind, proactive policing. More Black lives will be taken, and it's not going to matter to Biden because what he cares about is this narrative of pervasive white supremacy.
I've only got about a minute left, but your new book is called When Race Trumps Merit, How the Pursuit of Equity Sacrifices Excellence, Destroys Beauty, and Threatens Lives. Can you give us a little bit about what's in there?
Well, it looks at disparate impact theory. It turns out we're tearing down every meritocratic and behavioral standard, no matter how colorblind and fair, because they do have a disparate impact on Blacks. And the only allowable explanation at present for that disparate impact is racism. So we've decided that, a medical school admissions test must be racist somehow if Blacks are not admitted to medical schools in their proportional numbers at 13%, or the medical school licensing exam must be racist if it does not qualify as many Blacks to continue in their medical careers as whites and Asians. And so we're tearing those standards down. And I provide an alternative explanation, which is there are very, very large academic skills gaps and behavior gaps that explain the overrepresentation of Blacks in prison and the underrepresentation of Blacks in our most meritocratic institutions. 66% of Black 12th graders do not even possess partial mastery of 12th grade math skills, which are very elementary. It's basic arithmetic and knowing how to read a graph. 6% of Blacks are fully college ready according to the ACT exam. So how do we go from that, which we refuse to look at, and expect that absent racism, all of Google's engineers, there'll be 13% Google engineers or 13% researchers in a cancer or Alzheimer's lab. So I am making a call for a return to colorblind meritocratic standards and honesty about the real reason for racial disparities in our country. Because at present, as long as racism is the only allowable explanation for racial disparities, it is all coming down. Every institution is going to be dragged down.
Heather Mac Donald, the new book is called When Race Trumps Merit. When it comes out, come back. You can come back anytime. I always love talking to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
For more great content, like and subscribe to The Andrew Klavan Show wherever you get your podcasts.